Following great mixing advice can still lead to a bad mix. So in this video, I'll make some well-intended mixing moves, but fall into some common mistakes when mixing bass and low end. But quickly before that, I want to show you how this mix should sound when mixed the right way. Just quickly, if you make music like this and you want me to mix your next release, then head over to my website, terrybeckleyrecording.com, get in touch with me via the contact form, and I will get back to you. And at the end of this video, we will compare that to what we've done here. While mixing this bass, we will boost too much sub, cut too much of the quote-unquote mud, carve out too much space for the kick, and we will do it all badly. So let's hear where we're at now with our badly mixed drums from the last video, which you can go back and watch after this, link in the description, and a completely raw bass DI. Yeah, it sounds like a DI. Okay, so let's follow some good mixing advice, but get the wrong end of the stick. The first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this bass track, and we're going to do that classic split trick where you EQ out all the top end from one, so you just got the sub, and we can treat that then differently to the rest of the bass. And if you've ever mixed metal or any of the heavier genres, I'm sure you've come across this technique before. So we've duplicated it to this track here, and we're going to rename it bass sub. So first thing we'll do, without treating the DI or compressing it in any way, is we're going to grab an EQ and we're going to filter out everything above the sub frequencies. So here we'll grab a filter, and then we're going to get rid of everything apart from that low end. There we go. Now that level is quite quiet, so we'll boost it for the purposes of this demonstration. And you've probably heard with this low end here to keep it clean, so you get a nice clear low end. So that's what we're going to do here. We're just going to really limit the crap out of it now, so that we lock that low end in place. So I've got the Waves L1 here, and we're going to really slam it. Yeah, there we go. Locked in, not moving anywhere. But we don't want a big blob of low end, right? We want room for the kick. So let's poke a hole with another EQ, or you could use the same one from before. But to make this more simple to show, we're going to get a new EQ. And we're going to pull out where the kick lives, which could be anywhere between 50, 60, 80 hertz. If we go back to our kick mix, which we did in the previous video, we'll see that we boosted at 50 hertz, look, quite dramatically. So let's cut at 50 hertz in the bass. Yeah, there we go, 50 hertz, and we'll cut it there. Okay, so that's good. Now what we can do is, for the time being, mute that, and we'll work on the top end of the bass now. So same thing, we're not going to touch any compressors and treat that DI. We're going to now roll off everything but the sub and treat that differently to our low end. Now, advice that I did see in the past a few years ago was if we put this at around 200 here, roll off everything beneath it, on the sub track where we've done the opposite, we'll have a nice natural cut around this muddy frequency of the 100 to 200 hertz area. So we don't have to cut it out the bass ourselves and deal with that mud, we just leave it out completely. And that is a great example of how you can take mixing advice and apply it in a poor way, which is going to completely neuter our low end. But we'll get to that later in the mix. So let's hear those two basses together. When I mute the DI, you'll hear just the low end. When I mute the low end, you'll hear just the top end of the bass. But together, it will sound like one instrument. And it does. So far, so good. But it's a punk track, so we're going to want to dirty up that top end of the bass. So what distortions do we use? I have heard advice of people say run it through a guitar amp, and that does work. That is cool for a certain texture to the bass, but I want to try and at least have this sound good in solo. So let's use some actual bass distortion, and we're going to use a pedal here, which is the Dark Glass Ultra from Neural DSP. Really, really good, and I use this in a lot of my mixes. So let's dial in something clanky and gritty with attitude. It's a punk track, not a metal track, so we'll bring that drive down. killed the bass because we don't need the bass. We've got that in the sub. Then we've got some 1K in there now. I flicked this switch here so that it was onto 1K, which is where you find string noise and pick attack a lot of the time. But yeah, that's sounding pretty dirty. Let's hear the two of them together. Now I think we need to balance those a little better, so we'll bring the DI down and we'll fade it in so that it balances well with the low end, so it still sounds like a well-balanced bass. Yeah, there we go. Now let's treat those two bass tracks as one bass instrument on this bass bus here. So first thing that would make sense would be to compress them so that they are behaving as one instrument. So I brought up the compressor that I often use on bass, which is the CLA 76 from Waves, and let's dial that in. Cool, that gels them together quite nicely. And I think we've got quite a strong bass. We've got good attack in there. It's sounding pretty good on its own in solo. Okay, now that we've got that, let's enhance it with EQ. This is the EQ that I use all the time in my mixes, which is the SSL channel from Waves. And we're going to dial in the low end. We're going to cut back some of the mud, and we're going to bring out some of that bite. So I've often heard that you don't need anything on bass above 4K, but for the purposes of this, let's go for 5K so we get more of that clank out of it. We will roll off the low end later on, but for now, let's boost some sub. And you may have heard about placing the bass above the kick or the kick below the bass. So we've boosted the kick at 50. So therefore maths would tell us we can boost it 60 or 80 hertz and that will put the bass above the kick. And please note that that's actually not the best way to think about doing that thing in mixing. And therefore I'm falling into a common mistake here. I think I get a bit more out of it at 80 hertz. So we'll do that. And we've used a bell here too, rather than just boosting the low end with a shelf. So next, let's try and get some of that grit and attack out of it. It'll either be 1K or 1.5. Cool, so that sounded pretty gritty. Let's just check that EQ move. Yeah, got some of that sort of gritty punk attitude coming out there. So that's 1.5K here with a wide bell boost, 3.5 decibels. Okay, so one last thing we want to do is clean up some of that bass mud. I know we cut it out with the way we did the filtering, but you can still hear some low mids in there. As I'm sure you've heard, cutting that sort of 200 region clears up your low mids and will allow your sub and your low end to come through more. Let's give that a go. In fact, that sort of 500 hertz there just sounds like it's really ruining the tone of the bass. So let's kill that. Let's bring that out. Let's put this back to 0 and we'll see what we've done. Yeah, you can hear the low end become way more present when you do that. And it wouldn't be crazy to think that 500 hertz region is actually masking our low end. So pulling that out makes it more defined. Because in solo, it definitely sounds that way. So next, we're going to clean up the low end with a high pass filter. Make sure there's room for that kick below the bass. And we don't want to have unnecessary low end information, right? Okay, so let's grab this filter, we'll make it a bit steeper, and we'll roll it up all the way to 60, because then that way we've got that room for the kick and that boost at 50 hertz that we gave to the kick in the previous video. Let's hear what that sounds like. Yes, we've cleared up lots of rumble there and theoretically making room for the kick and dialing in the low end, right? Okay, next, you may have heard small speakers don't reproduce that well or at all under 80 hertz. So why don't we use our bass from waves to create some saturation with the bass at 80 where we boosted it, and then that way it will be present on smaller speakers. Yeah, there you go. Good, strong low end there. Okay, so last but not least is to limit the whole bass because we want the low end to stay pinned, which is generally good advice for genres like this. There we go, nice and in place. So let's hear what we have so far with our badly mixed drums, our badly mixed bass, and then our guitars which haven't been touched yet. Cool. Now should we compare that to how it's supposed to sound with the good mix? So the mistakes that we've fallen into here are mixing the bass completely out of context. One, with the rest of the track, we've used our brains instead of our ears when it comes to dialing in the low end with the kick and the bass. But we also haven't referenced any music on the speaker system that we're mixing on, or checking them on headphones to make sure that our low end isn't being misrepresented by our room. So this mix might sound good to me here, but when I take it out to my car or other speaker systems, it won't translate like professional mixers would. We've also cut out some really important frequencies that might not sound important here. The sort of 200 and the 500 hertz region, that sort of low mid-range, is actually what can make songs sound louder and more present and more in your face on less perfect speakers, but in all kinds of speaker systems. We didn't treat the DI either, which I like to do. I like to compress the DI first before I do anything else to make sure I'm getting an even tone when doing EQ moves and stuff like that. But everything I did do is advice that is correct, is good advice. It's just lacks the context of the mix and other music in the genre and might not be relevant or needed in certain scenarios. So if you want to see how I actually mixed this, you can watch this video here. And if you want to see all kinds of mixing, recording videos on pop punk and similar music to this, then head over to my channel. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.